Hey everyone, welcome to the studio. I am here for the last demo of the month, and of course we've been focused on rocks this month. I hope you enjoyed our little experiment with monotypes, monoprints last week, and that you continue to experiment with them, play with them. This week I'm going to change gears again, and we're going to paint some rocks, and I kind of want to put together all the lessons that we already had this month. And I'm going to paint a scene that includes a variety of rocks, from cliffs, rock faces, to rocks in water. So kind of put it all together. And I'm also going to be working on a piece of that BFK Rives printmaking paper. And I know a lot of you have tried it, gotten some of you are not able to get it, so you've tried other papers and printmaking papers. But I think the main thing to, the main point I tried to make this month is that we can use other kind of papers for pastel. It doesn't have to be branded pastel paper in order for us to paint on it. Some paper will hold more pastel layers than others, depending on how much tooth it has. We can add tooth, and that's one thing we discovered. But don't be put off by a paper that doesn't say pastel on the label. We can still use it. You do, though, want to make sure that it's an archival, acid-free paper, and I really discourage people from using sandpaper from the hardware store. It's not archival, and I know a lot of people think, oh well, it's cheap and I'm just practicing. But you just never know when you're going to hit one out of the park, and I would hate for that to be on paper from the hardware store. That might deteriorate. I've done it. So that's why I don't recommend it. So it's better to buy like full sheets of sanded paper and cut it smaller, or make your own with clear gesso. And that's what I did today. So I want to turn your attention over here. I guess let's first start off with, this is what we're going to be painting. And I don't know if there's a glare on this because it's an actual photograph. When I went to Yosemite, I wasn't painting. It was before I started painting, and I was into photography, so I have a few prints that I found. So I'm going to share this photo with you, and I'll share it so that it doesn't have the glare. So don't let the glare frustrate you during this demo. I'm going to give you a copy that you won't have glare on. So just try to ignore that as best you can. So what I want to do is work on this BFK Rives unsanded paper, but I decided I want to make my own sanded surface, so you see it's scratchy, by adding clear gesso. So as I was doing that, I thought to myself, what is it about the white paper that I don't like? And one of the things that I don't like is that it's white, because to me the white is great because it really makes the colors more vibrant, and especially if you're doing a wet underpainting, it works really well. But it also can be a distraction, so the little white bits of paper peeking through is a distraction, so you end up putting so much pastel to cover those up, and that's when you get close to the chance of making mud. So I had this idea, what if, I love when I have these ideas. I'm going to show this here. This is the clear gesso that I use, and if you haven't used it yet, if you haven't tried it yet, it comes out kind of milky, but it will dry clear. That's fine. But then I thought, well, why don't I tint it with some acrylic paint so that it has a color to it. So I used a little bit of gray acrylic paint, just the cheap kind of acrylic paint that you get in the craft store. And then when I applied that mixture, now let's go back to the painting. I actually used my stiff cheap brush, and I applied the clear gesso, tinted gesso, in a way that I help describe what it is I'm painting. So here, where the trees are, I made some kind of, fluffy marks. I tried to go with the contour of those cliffs. The water, I made flat brush strokes. So I tried to get a head start on the type of marks that I might make with pastel. The sky, I just tried to use clear, just tinted slightly. So I waited, I think I did that first, and then I tinted the mixture. So what I ended up with is a sanded surface that has some tone to it, almost a little bit of a value study, kind of. I could have pushed that up further if I wanted to. I could have added more paint and made these areas darker. But I will do that in the first layer. So I just wanted to share that with you because I thought that was a great way to get rid of that white paper but still have something that might work for the painting. So we'll see how it goes. This is an experiment. What I'm going to do for this demo today, and I'll share a picture of the pastels that I'm using. They are mostly Terry Ludwig pastels that I picked from my big box. I'm going to use some Nupastels, some hard pastels for the first layer, or the block in. What else did I want to say about that? Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I'm going to take this painting, probably not to the finish, but what I'm going to do is divide this demo into 2 parts. So I'll take it like up to, if you're familiar with my paint along, step 3, where I get most of the pastel layers in place and I just have to make the finishing marks, and I will do that in another demo. So it's most likely going to break this into 2 parts so that it doesn't drag on so long. Alright, so I'm going to get started by blocking in all the big simple shapes, and I'm going to use the block in of extremes, meaning I'm going to put in the darkest darks, the lightest lights, the most intense colors, and then that will give me a roadmap to follow. Now it's going to be a little bit tricky here because when I look at my photo, the dark rocks in the foreground are definitely underexposed. They're not really black, so we'll have to add a little more color. These cliffs, these are a little bit overexposed. Now, yes, they are very light in real life, but they're not as white as they are in my photo, so I'm going to make them a little bit richer. So let's start off with the upright planes, which are the dark areas, which are the tree shapes. So I'm going to go in with a dark blue and put in some of these tree shapes. And remember what happens, our brain wants to put things in order, but we like things that are a little bit unorganized, so we want to keep that in mind. So we have these trees are in the front, but then there's some other trees that are a little bit further back. So I'm going to put those in. There's a tree right here in the foreground. I don't know if I'm going to put it in, but I do want to darken the bank just a little bit here. And then we get over to the right side and we have some more taller trees that are kind of in the middle distance. I'm looking at the photo as just for guidance, but I'm not worried about making it photorealistic, so I don't really worry about having every tree exactly the same as it is in the photograph. Although this is a very iconic place in Yosemite, so I have to be true to the contours of the cliffs because people would recognize it, although I don't have to count the trees. Does that make sense? Alright, so let's come into the rock area, and while they're not really black, they are certainly dark, so I'm going to just put a few in here, and this is where I get to take out my artistic license and arrange them in a pleasing, interesting design. And some of them I'll probably add on top of the water when I put the water and the reflections in. You know, they're smaller than an inch. That's my 1-inch rule. Things smaller than an inch can go on top, especially these stones in the background. But I'm just going to put them in there just to remind me. But over here, there's some dark rocks. And I want to kind of create some stepping stones into the painting. Again, I will probably adjust this as the painting develops. We have to keep in mind that there's reflections of these trees. So I'm going to pull my reflections down with vertical marks. So did you notice that when I painted the trees, I used kind of a back and forth stroke to create the kind of feeling of the foliage? But whenever you paint a reflection, you want to paint vertical marks. and not the same type of marks that you used in the trees. Because why? It would just look like an upside down tree. And even though there's a lot of clarity in the reflection, we're not going to make it exactly a mirror image, because then it won't look like water at all. Alright, so those are all the darks, the dark shapes. The next thing I'm going to do is the light. The light. Now, part of me wants to say that the cliffs here are the lightest value, but typically it's the sky that's the lightest value. So what I'm going to do, and that actually, I'm going to put a little bit of pink up in the sky. The sky's going to be lighter than this pink, but this is just going to be a good color to put underneath the blue sky. Alright, so that's up in the sky, but it's also going to be down in the water, right in here as well. Now the next thing is the most intense color. So the most intense color we have is there's two, I think. It's the green on the grasses, the bank is a nice kind of yellowy green. I won't be using this exact color, I'll change it, but this is just for the block in. And also this really, really rich blue of the water, which is the reflection of the sky. I'm going to put it in right now just because I want to remind myself that that's one of the things that I really love about this image. Then what do we have left are these cliffs, these rocky cliffs. And I'm going to make them darker than I think they should be. And we will adjust them as the painting progresses. Especially the one in the distance. We're going to have to make it a little bit cooler and duller. And I'm going to try to be true to the way these cliffs really look, because they are so recognizable. Alright, so we have them, the cliffs there. We also need to show the reflection. And I'm going to use, again, I'm going to use those vertical strokes. This is one of these scenes that we talked about this earlier in the month on one of the other demos, that I've had this photo for a long time, and I avoided it because I thought it was too complicated, too many different kind of rocks. It has so many elements, from the reflections to the various types of rocks. So I really put it off. So I'm tackling it now. Oops. There must be a color already on there. I'm tackling it now with the hopes that I can do a better job, but as one of the posts this month said, remind yourself that it's only paper, and what do I have to lose really to give it a try? It may fail, but I have to allow myself that the ability to accept that failure and to move on from it and not let it prevent me from even trying. So we'll do that together. So what am I doing now? I'm just using this piece of pipe insulation foam to rub in this first layer, just so that I can get a really nice soft, out of focus underpainting that acts as a roadmap for the rest of the painting. Alright, so I'm going to take the reflections and make these downward strokes for the reflections, and then go horizontal for the water. Now you might be saying, but Karen, you just got rid of all the rocks and things like that. Yeah, but we'll be able to bring those back. I'm not really worried about it at this stage. So here we have the underpainting, and I'm going to grab a photograph. Hang on just a second. A lot of times I like to take a photograph of this stage of a painting, sometimes just to remind me of what it might have looked like if it goes too far astray, and sometimes just because I can see, if I look at the photo, I can see problems in the photo, but I think this is going to be okay. So now what we get to do is attack this painting with the softer pastels, and I'm going to begin with the darks, and I'm going to reinforce the darks. And the easiest thing for me to do always is to just start with the color I used, which is that dark blue. And if you followed my demos before, you know that part of my process is to reinforce the dark areas using several colors that are the same value. So I build up the layers of color, keeping the values the same so that those colors are optically blended by our eye. So there's that dark blue. I'm going to put in the bank, and I remember at one point I think I talked about worms. If not, if you're new and you haven't heard me talk about worms, worms are any really dark, thin shape that will go across a painting. They happen a lot on riverbanks, and so here there's a perfect example of worms that I have to avoid. I'm going to re-establish some of these rock shapes. Again, these will be adjusted as the painting progresses. I'm not pulling my hair out trying to get every rock to be exactly the way I see it in the photograph. But that's just me. And you know, everyone is happy with a certain level of detail, and we're not all the same, and that's fine. That's what makes our work unique to our own vision. Alright, so that's one layer of dark. I'm going to take another layer of dark. This is a dark violet. It's the same value as what I already have. And I'm going to just lightly go over these dark blue areas. Why? Just so that my dark areas, my darks, are more interesting. Could I have just, you might say, well, Karen, they're just dark green. Why aren't you just making them dark green? Well, I just want them to be a little more interesting. Now I'm going to do something that is a color that you might not expect to put in the darks, and this is a dark kind of reddish brown, and that's just to give relief to the green that I'm going to be putting in. Alright, now I'm going to add some of the green. Now these trees have strong light, right? They're lit by the sun. I'm using a kind of grayed down green, but it's still a dark value. And I'm going to use them on these distant trees. These trees, these smaller ones, are further back. So they're going to be lighter, cooler, duller. I'll just add a little bit in there. I don't know. I'll just put a little bit of green on these rocks. And there's like clumps of grasses that are growing in this area. Now, I have this Terry Ludwig eggplant color, which is a really dark purple. And at this point, I'm going to just put it in just a few locations as accents. So like right at the base of some of these bigger trees, we see this really super dark, I call it. And definitely down here by the rocks. These are really dark, but they're not black. Remember, we want them to have a little bit of color and life to them. So the Terry Ludwig eggplant is perfect for these rocks in the foreground. I'll just put a few in, but I know, as I keep saying, I'm going to be adjusting this area. Alright. So, now I've got all of my darks reinforced. Could you grab me a wipe? I'm using up my wipes. I know that someone recommended that they use just wet washcloths, which work really well if you don't want to use wipes. But I happen to have some wipes handy, so I'm going to use them up. Alright, so we blocked in our darks with a variety of colors. The next thing that I'm going to do, and this is what I typically do, is I want to work from top to bottom so that any pastel dust that falls will not disturb what's going to happen on the bottom. In other words, I don't want it beautiful and then get it covered up with dust. But before I do the sky, I want to make sure I have the contours of these rock cliffs accurate. So I'm taking a dark blue-gray to paint in the shadowed areas of these rocks. So I'm doing the darker areas that I see first. with this gray down, kind of a greenish blue-gray. Is that a word? I also, as I look at it, I see that it's got a bluish tinge to it, so I'm going to add some of a kind of a gray down blue to these areas. Just pull them down, and then this guy in the distance is definitely got a bluer cast to it. And that one here, and some of the crevices I can add a little bit of blue in there. Let's see. They also feel like they have a little bit of warmth to them, like they're not as chalky white as the photo suggests. So I'm adding a little bit of a kind of gray, kind of a taupey color. And again, at this point, I'm not worried about completing these rocks. I just want to kind of get the contour of them mostly. I'm going to add a little bit of a peach to this. Give them a little bit of warmth because they are getting some sunlight on them. So just using a variety of colors to build up the rocks. And I am noticing that the pastel is skipping over these rocks in a really, really interesting way because I used that brush and kind of brushed the pastel on, kind of following the contours of these cliffs. So it's working out really well to give my marks a little bit of texture, which is what I was hoping for. Alright, I think I have enough in the rock faces now that I can go ahead and do the sky. One thing that I loved about this scene was that it was a blue sky day and the blue sky was being reflected strongly in the water. And the blue in the water is very deep, rich blue. But I'm not showing that upper portion of the sky, alright? So, I mean, I feel like it's this color, but if I made the sky all that color, it would look like nighttime. So I'm making it a little bit lighter than I think it should be. And I know the sky gets lighter and warmer as it comes closer to the horizon. So here's a little bit of a lighter blue, and now let's introduce a warmer blue, which is more of a light turquoise. And then as it comes closest to the horizon, it kind of gets a really nice warm yellowy color. So we'll put that in at the horizon. Now one thing that I probably need to do, you can see the pink underneath the sky that was from that underpainting. And I like how that pink kind of peeks through and helps unite everything. So I think I'm going to leave it alone. I thought about perhaps blending it in. If I were to blend it in, I would simply use my finger and just kind of skip it across. I think I'll do that up at the top. I want to make a correction here before I go much further, and that is this particular outcropping is, I don't have the angle correct on it, so I just want to correct that. And this actually goes up a bit higher. I want to correct it before I go too far. And again, those are going to be lighter, and we'll get to that. Okay. So now we have our sky in place, and I want to, I'm going to do this now so that I can show you what happens. Like, here's the way reflections work. You take the sky and you flip it over on top of the ground. What is at the horizon is going to be in the most distant water. Okay? What is it at your feet in front of you is going to be the color of the sky that is the highest part, right? So if I were to flip this over, this color would be in the middle, but it would be darker even further up, which I'm not showing. Imagine like this, if I were to, the sky's going to get darker as we go up. So that means the water down here will actually be darker than it shows in that area. And actually the photograph is true to that idea. And I'm going to just put this in. I will probably be adjusting this further, but I do want to put it in just so that you can see. Okay. What's happening. Okay, so I've got the darks in place, the lights in place. Now what I'm going to do is start working on the trees, work my way down, and then I'll refine the rocks. I'm going to just do a little bit more, and then we'll stop this part of the demonstration. Okay, now what I'm going to do is work more on the trees, this area in here. But what I realized something is important that I neglected to tell you, but when you're doing reflections, if you put a color above the water, like in the thing, in your subject, you also need to add that color in the water, and I neglected to do that. So the trees, for example, and when I don't paint reflections for a while, I actually forget. Every layer that I put in the trees, I should have brought down into the water. Is it too late to do it? No. That's why I'm going to tell you now. So if it's above the water, you want to put it in the water. So I'm going to just go back and redo those colors that I put in the trees. Where's that green? Green, where are you? Here you are. Above the water, in the water. So that way you have a head start on your reflections. I put color in the clips, right? Above the water, it's got to go in the water. Above the water, in the water. That looks better already, right? It was missing something. I had some blue, right? Above the water. And make sure they match up. This is another thing with reflection. You want to make sure they match up to what you're painting and not what's in your photo. Because you may have put your you may have changed the location of your shapes, right? So you don't want to copy the reflections and it doesn't match up correctly. Alright, so now what I want to do is I want to work on the tree shapes a little bit more. And I did give a very quick spray with workable fixative. But that's not necessary. This paper, because of the clear gesso, has plenty of tooth. I just like to use the workable fixative to strengthen the darks. So what I'm doing is I'm making my marks kind of go with the direction that these type of tree branches would follow. So kind of a back and forth mark making. And we're all going to paint trees differently. We all have our different way of making marks. So, you know, don't feel the need to have to copy exactly how I do it. You know, you want to paint trees the way you paint trees. Need to get a little bit. These are front lit, right? Normally, I like to paint something that is lit by the side, on the side, because it's usually have more interesting light and shadows, but these are front lit, so they are receiving light directly in their front. So I have to be careful that I allow a lot of the dark to exist underneath and don't cover it all up, because what will happen is they will just start looking flat. These trees in the distance are going to be lighter and cooler, so I'm using this grayed down. It's a gray blue. Do they look that color in the photo? No, they don't. They actually look green, but I'm exaggerating this effect so that I can create a feeling of depth. So we want to exaggerate the effects of aerial perspective. All right. There's not much happening on these trees. Let's just give a little bit. We will define them further when we start doing the negative painting with the colors on the cliff. Now, what did you do? Above the water, in the water. So I'm going to take that color that I just used in the trees and pull it in the water. The trees in the distance are not as reflected as, the reflections are not as long. Just put a little bit of that blue-gray in there. One thing that we can do is take our finger at this point. Oh, I see the mark of the paper. And pull these reflections down. In fact, let's just pull all of it down. You can see by doing that it's starting to look even more watery and wet. So we'll pull them down with our finger like so. And then we're going to come back with the water on top of that. Alright, so let's do something with this grassy area. The grassy area is kind of a yellowy green. I will tell you this was early fall, autumn. So things were starting to turn golden, but it wasn't quite there yet. So I'm going to use a mixture of warmer yellowy greens. I'm going to have to come in and reinforce the bank. Remember, we don't want to have... Squeaky. What? Squeaky. Squeaky? Oh, guys, guess what? I got a new easel, and we have to set it up. And the new easel will not be squeaky anymore. So I got to put that on the list. We have to do that. Maybe we do an unboxing. Maybe that'll be a good live stream. We'll see. Let's see. There's a little bit of some rocky area in here, so I'm going to use that peachy color and put in some of those rocks. Just hint at them. And I want to reinforce the dark of the bank. I'm going to take out that blue. I don't want it everywhere, so I'm going to just make a few dark marks to separate the water from the land. The other thing that I need to do is I like the tree trunks in here, so I'm going to take that hard pastel that I used initially and just put a few of those marks to represent some of those sunlit tree trunks. They're peachy color. Alright, and are they reflected? They certainly are. So if you're above the water, you want to put them in the water, and they're going to actually go opposite. Straight down or opposite. Put them over here, make them match up. Alright, what I want to show you right now is a little bit about the water, and then I'm going to stop this demo and I will do it a part 2 to finish up. But I do want to show you in real time about these reflections. So what I want to do is I want to reinforce these stones with that dark Terry Ludwig and some of the grassy bits that are coming off of it. We'll probably put a few more in. But when it comes time to doing the water, we want to have horizontal strokes for the water, cutting across. In fact, we want to cut across on top of the reflections. So I'm going to just carry it over very, very lightly. And I really like how my brush strokes, when I applied the clear gesso in this horizontal marks, it really helps the pastel skip over, and it just helps make it look like it's watery. I do need to pull down the color of these rocks with my finger because there's a little bit of that in the reflection. Then the other thing that I do to really solidify this feeling of the reflection is I'm going to create a few current lines. So I'm taking that pale blue and just making some marks just to represent some of the possible movement in the water. That is how I create the reflected feeling. Now I am going to stop this demo now because I want to refine the cliffs, refine the reflections, but I think I've shown you enough in this video demo to get you guys started or give you some good tips on how to tackle such a complicated scene with different types of rocks and other elements of a landscape. But I'm really, really excited about this idea of the clear gesso, tinted clear gesso on top of this printmaking paper. It's gonna open a whole new world for me because I've done it in the past, but not consistently. But I really like the effect that I've been getting this month. So I will see you in part 2 of this demo, and we'll finish this painting.